Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, Ethereum is currently trading in the same range, currently right around $4,500. This is more or less where it's been since basically 2 months ago, right? Like early August. Generally, the assessment we've talked about for Ethereum over the last, let's call it 7 or 8 months, is that after it went home, right, to its lower logarithmic regression trend line, it should then rally to all-time highs. However, when everyone else on here was essentially screaming for alt season back when Ethereum swept this high, we said it would likely be rejected on the first attempt. On the next attempt, it should be able to break through, but that attempt could still be some ways off. That doesn't mean, you can't see it go back up to $4,700, $4,800. What I'm saying is that in order for Ethereum to get up here in any durable fashion, I think that we need a little bit more time for the bull market support band to catch up, is essentially what I'm saying. So we came pretty close to testing it just a few weeks ago. And as I've stated before, this is no reason to sort of sell Ethereum or anything like that. If you're going to sell it, it made sense to do so up here. That's when I said I was skimming a little bit in preparation for the pullback. You can see that Ethereum came to within a few percent here of the 21-week EMA. Now, what I think could very well happen is a continued chop in this range until the bull market support band catches up and forces Ethereum to make a decision. For now, Ethereum is essentially stuck between a rock and a hard place, so as they say, where it's struggling to break through up here because it's been this like long-term resistance level. And this is the first time we've been at these levels in like 4 years. But it also struggles to really want to go below this because obviously there's a lot of buyers who missed buying when Ethereum went home. Hopefully none of you guys, because we talked about that outcome for probably the last 3 to 4 years and how it was a great opportunity. But for the latecomers, this is, they're going to be wanting to buy any dips they can get. So apparently, the way I see it playing out is in the short term, you're likely going to see continued chop in this range so that the bull market support band catches up. And what's going to happen is it's going to force Ethereum to make a decision, and it's probably going to happen within the next 2 months. Okay. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, hold on a second, right? How can that be? Like, how could it still take Ethereum that long to make a decision? Because if Bitcoin were to break out, which I understand is probably most people's assumption here, and hopefully that's what happens, but the assumption by a lot of people is that Bitcoin will break out, therefore Ethereum must immediately follow. But that is not always true. You don't even have to go that far back in time to recognize that that is not always true. For instance, if you were to go look at monthly returns, this is the End of the Cryptoverse website, by the way. If you go look at monthly returns for Bitcoin, we saw that Bitcoin went up 5% in the month of September. However, Ethereum went down 5% in the month of September. So there's no guarantee that because Bitcoin goes up, Ethereum has to immediately follow. If Bitcoin were to go up, Ethereum would likely follow, but there can be like a delay, right? Like a lagged effect. Let me give you an example so that you don't just think I'm blowing smoke, because I mean, this is crypto. Don't trust what I say, verify. Like verify if what I'm saying is true. And we can do that by going all the way back in time to 2017. Structurally speaking, this cycle has and continues to resemble the 2016-2017 cycle. For instance, in 2016-2017, we saw at the very beginning of 2017, Bitcoin tested its 2016 high. You can see that right here. It tested the 2016 high, and in 2025, Bitcoin tested the 2024 high right there. So you can see there are similarities. That's not the only similarity. You're like, that's a pretty ridiculous similarity that you're trying to point out. There's other similarities as well, right? If you were to look at the number of days that it has taken, let's see if I can find this, days since percentage decline, the number of days it has been since Bitcoin had a 50% decline. Does it look like last cycle? No. Does it look like 3 cycles ago? No. It looks like the 2017 cycle where there were very minimal pullbacks. Okay. If you were to measure Bitcoin's ROI peak to peak, and you look at this cycle compared to the 2016 cycle, structurally there are a lot of similarities, right? Like it does look kind of the same. It's obviously fallen off here a little bit, but we would expect that with diminishing returns. One kind of weird thing to point out that I don't find joy in pointing out, but I will put it out there just so we're covering all our bases. If you measure it from the low, you know, we're already potentially further along in the cycle than maybe people give it credit for. And so it's important to remember that if we get weekly closes by Bitcoin below the 50-week moving average, which is now around 101K, then there's a good chance the cycle would be over at that point. Until that happens, or until the peak indicators start firing off, there's reason to be optimistic. So with that in mind, there is reason to compare this to the 2016-2017 cycle. We even have the same president, right? And so when we think about that, it makes sense to look at what happened with Bitcoin in the 2017 cycle. Interestingly enough, Bitcoin also formed a local high in August and a local low in September. And then it broke to a new all-time high in, you guessed it, October and early October, right? Now, in 2025, Bitcoin put in a local top in August, a low in September, and then, of course, as we said was most likely outcome, Bitcoin broke to a new all-time high in October. It is struggling in the short term to get through. I think the reason is because it's coming up on this resistance level right here. That's the sort of the resistance level that Bitcoin has to get through. But you can see how structurally there's a lot of similarities with that 2017 cycle. Now, you might assume that when Bitcoin was moving quickly back in 2017, in October of 2017, it would seem like there would be a safe assumption to be made that Ethereum was also rallying with Bitcoin in the month of October. Because Bitcoin was able to move up from the September low of 2,900 up to the late October high before that pullback, and it moved up 154%. So it would be reasonable to assume that, hey, Ethereum probably moved up during that same time period. However, that is not what happened. In 2017, while Ethereum did form a low in September, it rallied back up and then kind of came back down and then formed another higher low. And what was happening was basically Ethereum was waiting for the bull market support band to catch up. And back then, Ethereum did not have the ability to break through here until the bull market support band caught up. You see that? And it kept finding support on it, but it also kept finding resistance anytime it got up there until the bull market support band caught up, and it took until mid-November for Ethereum to break out. But again, by mid-November, Bitcoin was only a few weeks away from its market cycle top. So Bitcoin was able to break out and rally 200%, even though Ethereum was not able to go anywhere, right? Like it chopped around, but it didn't really make that move that everyone was waiting for. And so I think it's reasonable to think that this time might not be different. What if we're going through that same outcome right now, where the high that Ethereum is stuck with is the high from the prior cycle, but it just doesn't have enough fuel to get through. But anytime it comes back down to 4K, it generally finds support. So what I'm suggesting is that, you have a low here, you have a higher low. It's possibility that Ethereum continues to chop until the bull market support band catches up. And then when it does catch up, that should be enough for Ethereum to break through into an all-time high. However, that could still be many weeks away. I'm not going to dismiss the possibility of it happening sooner, but there is a realistic outcome here where Ethereum does not break out as quickly as a lot of people may want it to. One of the reasons you could argue that Bitcoin got rejected on this first attempt to break out is just simply because people are not putting their money where they should be. They're getting distracted by the altcoin market in general. And when that happens and Bitcoin dominance starts to fall near a breakout point, Bitcoin then has to drop back down so that dominance can go back up, and it punishes the people that sort of have malinvested their capital into things that aren't as important. I know that's going to sound like a toxic Bitcoin maxi view, but it's just the way the market has worked in the past, and I don't control that, right? I don't control the rules of the cryptoverse. I just try and enforce them. And normally what happens when Bitcoin's building up to something, if people start FOMOing into other things, then Bitcoin will recognize that. It'll drop, dominance will go up until people get the memo, and then Bitcoin will suck the liquidity from the altcoin market to then break out. That's what often happens. All right? So I know a lot of people have been asking me recently about Bitcoin dominance because, it has dropped a little bit, but don't miss the forest for the trees. Dominance formed a low in early September, and it's been moving up ever since. I understand, there's people in this space that have the attention span of a first grader, but the reality is that Bitcoin dominance has been moving up for weeks, and I think it's going to continue. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. I could be wrong. But it's difficult when, I put out these predictions and they will pan out, and then we just get 1 week where it drops and everyone's like, well, what about Bitcoin dominance? Well, what about it? It's up from 57%. It's up 2% basically. In a really short period of time, right? Like just in about a month or so, it's up from 57 to essentially 59%. So it is moving in the right direction. There's just people that don't want to accept that, right? They're more so inclined to just scream alt season from the top of their lungs, largely because they're more incentivized to do that for whatever reason. So dominance should continue to move up here despite the short-term pullback. I think people will get the memo, recognize that Bitcoin dominance does tend to go up in October, and Bitcoin's going to need for people to recognize that in order for Bitcoin to continue the bull run. If people do not recognize that, then that's a negative thing. One of the things I mentioned a few weeks ago was one of the indicators that would provide confluence to the idea of Bitcoin all-time highs in Q4 is dominance rising. And we saw dominance rising in September, so we said Bitcoin will likely put in a new all-time high in Q4. If Bitcoin dominance starts to recover here quickly and we see it back above 59% soon, maybe back to 59.3%, 59.5, even 60, that would be a good sign. Forget what all these other people are telling you, that it's a bad thing that dominance goes up, right? That's not true. Bitcoin dominance represents, or I should say, Bitcoin represents the best of the cryptoverse. Okay? So when the dominance of the best thing in crypto goes up, that's not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing to the people that are getting paid to shill altcoins. Okay? So I can understand why it might be a bad thing to them, but inherently and intrinsically, it is not a bad thing for Bitcoin dominance to go up. And if you are wired to think that way, then I fear it's going to be very difficult for you to navigate the cryptoverse, as crypto portfolios, in my opinion, should be valued in Satoshis and not US dollars. So the way I see this playing out for Ethereum is continued chop for a while longer. Okay. And I don't know if it's going to play out like 2017 or not, but one of the things to note in 2017 is that Ethereum rallied in sort of late September into about mid-October, got a brief pullback into late October, early November, and then ran. I don't know what the narrative could be to cause Ethereum to stall out. Maybe it's like the government shutdown ends in a few weeks and people get spooked about how the labor market report's going to be, and so they wait to see that come out, and when that comes out okay, then Ethereum makes the final run to the market cycle top. It could be it could be any number of things, right? It could be any number of things. But that's potentially one narrative. Another narrative could be that there's like a 55 to 60% chance, arguably, that the Bank of Japan might raise rates in late October. And, after the Bank of Japan raised rates, the last couple of times it caused Ethereum to kind of struggle for a little bit. Like if you were to overlay Japan interest rates onto the chart. I know this sounds crazy, but if you look at any of the videos we talked about with Japanese interest rates, it actually worked out really well, where they raised rates and then Ethereum found a low pretty shortly thereafter before then going back up. So, if the Bank of Japan does raise rates at the end of October, it could just be a nice final low that Ethereum might form before going into its final rally into the market cycle top. So those are my views on Ethereum. In the short term, I see continued chop. I see the bull market support band catching up. The 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, those are going to continue to go higher in the coming weeks. At some point, it's going to force Ethereum's hand. Like Ethereum will have to decide which way it's going to go. Remember, the market does not need a reason to go up. It needs a reason to go down. So if it doesn't get a reason to go down in that time period, then it should break through. What I think is going to happen is it'll chop for a while. It'll then break through, go into the market cycle top, and then we'll get the 2026 bear market. That's how I see it playing out. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.